Hey, everybody. It is Thursday, February 27th. You're listening to the Mo News Podcast. I'm Moshe Wanunu.
And I am Jill Wagner. This is the place where we bring you just the facts.
And we read all the news and read between the lines so you don't have to. Jill, a lot of official holidays we're tracking this week. Yesterday, of course, National Pistachio Day. Today, it's not only National Toast Day, but it's also National Chili Day.
Two things I can get behind, Moshe. I love a turkey chili, and I like toast.
Turkey chili, interesting. So not a beef chili for you.
I'm more of a turkey chili gal.
So that's a derivative of the Tex-Mex special. Chili can trace its origins down to Texas, Mexico. Not clear if it was something related to the original Aztecs or the Spanish brought it with them. There's a story out there that it came from the Canary Islands originally, one of the Spanish colonies. Either way, it's delicious. As for Toast Day, it actually began in the UK, which is no surprise. Scotland is where the first toaster was invented.
Very interesting.
You know, we try to arm you with just interesting factoids, and hopefully someone in your life appreciates them when you recite them later today.
Did you know?
Did you know? And people are like, I don't know if I care. But ultimately, if you're listening to this in the morning, go get yourself some toast, put some butter, jam, whatever you like on your toast this morning.
Whatever.
Chili for breakfast. That could be a little weird, though. That's aggressive.
Okay, let's get to the news here. President Trump holds his first cabinet meeting with special guest Elon Musk. The key takeaways from that meeting, with news on everything from the war in Ukraine to what the president's saying about proposed Republican cuts to Medicaid.
The media was almost there for more of the meeting than not. Jill, a lot of news, and we'll try to break it all down for you.
Plus, the president's offering gold card visas for $5 million to rich foreigners.
Not like the Visa credit card, but like visas to become a citizen eventually. We'll break down the plan, the advocates, and the critics.
And what Health and Human Services Secretary RFK Jr. has to say after an unvaccinated child has now died in that Texas measles outbreak. And
some late-breaking news last night about next year's flu vaccine.
To the Middle East, President Trump promotes his new Gaza plan in what appears to be an AI video.
This threw a lot of us for a loop yesterday, Jill.
A bizarre AI video.
Well, it ends with shirtless Trump, AI shirtless Trump, and AI shirtless Netanyahu.
And it comes as phase one of the hostage ceasefire deal is nearing an end. What could be next for the region? And now to a different presidential administration. Bill Clinton's. In an interview, Monica Lewinsky says that Clinton should have resigned over their affair instead of, quote, throwing her under the bus. We have the clip.
If you thought that story was done, it's still living on in a fourth decade, everybody.
Got milk? In an unexpected turn of events, dairy milk makes a major comeback. What's behind it? Michelle Trachtenberg, actress from Gossip Girl and Buffy the Vampire Slayer, dies at the age of 39.
Yeah, we'll tell you what we know.
And in lighter news, how much does the Tooth Fairy pay these days?
Jill, first graders are outraged, but interestingly, the Tooth Fairy pays more in certain states and regions across the country. We'll break it down for you.
And Moshe has on this day in history.
Your clues today: black fly in your Chardonnay, rain on your wedding day, and a death row pardon 2 minutes late. A few clues for all of you.
All right, President Trump held the first cabinet meeting of his second term on Wednesday, convening his cabinet secretaries and some of the nominees who still haven't been confirmed yet. The president also invited Elon Musk, who runs the new Department of Government Efficiency, or DOGE. Trump gave Musk the floor at the beginning of the meeting to talk about DOGE's efforts and how all of the cabinet secretaries are identifying waste, fraud, and abuse at their respective agencies. Asked by reporters about his requirement that federal workers send an email with 5 points summarizing their work over the past week, Musk said it wasn't meant as a performance review, rather a way to look for fake employees on the payroll. Here's a little bit of what he had to say.
Actually, it was a pulse check review. Do you have a pulse? Do you have a pulse and two neurons? So if you have a pulse and two neurons, you can reply to an email. This is, I think not a high bar, is what I'm saying. This is, anyone can accomplish this. But what we are trying to get to the bottom of is we think there are a number of people on the government payroll who are dead, which is probably why they can't respond. And and some people who are not real people, like they're literally fictional individuals that are collecting paychecks. Well, somebody's collecting paychecks on a fictional individual. So we're just literally trying to figure out, are these people real? Are they alive? And can they write an email?
So I haven't heard this one before, Jill, that there are dead people, that he sees dead people on the payroll. We'll wait to see if this is actually a thing. What was interesting in those remarks, and again, he tossed it over to him for a few minutes there at the top. Elon Musk in a baseball cap, standing, doesn't have a seat at the table because he's not in the cabinet, but spent a few minutes, took a couple questions from the media there. Elon did acknowledge that they have gotten some stuff wrong and they hope to correct it. He actually was hoping for a laugh when he noted that they cut the Ebola response team at USAID, but now they have brought them back. We'll get into that in a second because that's disputed here. But there were several secretaries sitting in the room who have told their department employees not to respond to that email from over the weekend. And I guess they're going to give it another go here. Trump been supportive of Elon, but ultimately some of these cabinet secretaries, at least behind the scenes, a little frustrated with the way Elon is working. You're also hearing that from some Republicans on Capitol Hill who, again, like his goals of cutting waste, don't like his tactics and how things are being approached here, and just all the media attention that has surrounded him over the course of the last few weeks. Actually, if you look at Google searches right now, Joe, there are more searches for Elon Musk than Donald Trump as people look for more information. So a lot of animosity there behind the scenes.
Right. It comes as there's a bit of a turf war between DOJ and several department heads over who has authority over their specific workforce. As we've been reporting, many of those department heads telling their workers not to respond to Musk's email. But Moshe, when a reporter asked about cabinet members who may have been dissatisfied with Musk's approach, the president looked around the table and said, "Is anybody unhappy?" Here is a bit of that exchange.
Is anybody unhappy with Elon? If you are, well, throw them out of here. Is anybody unhappy?
As you can hear, the cabinet members laughed. I don't know if some of that was nervous laughter, but they were laughing. And then they were clapping for Elon Musk.
Can you imagine if like one of the secretaries was like, yes, actually, Mr. President, I would like to discuss right now this guy and they had tried to make a scene there in front of the cameras. So
now that you mention it.
Like, yeah. Like, let's talk about Elon. Elon, get over here. Like, what are you anyway? There was no shot anyone was going to raise their hand and say they had a problem with Musk. At least not in that room. Okay,
the question though, Moshe, is how common or unusual is it that Musk or somebody in his position who is not in the cabinet would be at a cabinet meeting? Can you put this into perspective for us?
So if you saw the pictures, a video yesterday, you see the cabinet secretaries and the vice president sitting at the table, and then there's all these various advisors sitting along the wall of the room there, of the cabinet room, which is just off the Oval Office. So there are always outsiders in cabinet meetings, and once in a while they do invite outside guests. I should note one of the last cabinet meetings that Biden had in the fall, Jill Biden, the first lady, addressed the cabinet about her various initiatives. And you can actually compare, in some ways, it's actually interesting, comparing Jill Biden to Elon Musk and the influence each one had over each president, right? Jill was the power behind Joe. She was the one who was convincing him to run again, some of his major decisions, though she didn't have power over government like Elon does. So the similarities end at one point. So not totally out of the realm that there would be an outside speaker, but what's unique here is this relationship between Trump and Elon. It appears to be as strong as ever. We're continuing to be on watch here for, when or if this relationship starts to falter here, though he is not officially a member of the cabinet. And they have actually said that he doesn't actually technically run DOJ. He's in charge of DOJ, but he's not the administrator of DOJ. And this has been a key legal item here, as judges have been asking, as all these lawsuits pop up around DOJ, who runs DOJ? And for legal purposes, the White House has been saying no. And they recently named a woman who I hadn't heard of before, and no one in the media had heard of within 48 hours, to say that she is the administrator of DOJ. Her name is Amy Gleason. She worked in Trump's first term, was actually on the task force. Deborah Birx of the COVID task force was there, ran the COVID database. So had done some stuff, but she's sort of, I guess, the name that they're putting up as the person who's leading DOJ. Nonetheless, Trump has been describing Musk as a genius. He did so this week in front of Emmanuel Macron. He's backed them up on this email, saying that if people don't respond to this email, despite what his cabinet secretaries say, Trump is like, well, these employees, if they don't respond, are semi-fired or fired. We talked about that earlier this week on the podcast. The White House says about 1 million federal workers have replied to the email. That's about half of people in the federal workforce right now. Trump says the rest who haven't replied on the bubble. He said maybe they're gone or going to be gone, despite the fact that the Office of Personnel Management, which basically is run by DOJ, has said that responses are voluntary. So still a lot of confusion there around the email gone around the world, and it looks like it's going to go around again here. As I mentioned, Elon did mention in the meeting that DOJ has made some mistakes, like, again, accidentally cutting Ebola prevention. He says that that's back. But we heard from people, Jill, who worked on that, who actually worked at USAID, have lost their jobs. They talked to us here at Mo News, and they're like, no, that's a lie. The Ebola effort, the Ebola identification and stopping the spread effort is not back. Even if they've turned the money back on, which it wasn't back on last week, they've fired basically everybody who was working on it. So there's a lot of questions here about some of the claims of DOJ as well. Again, Elon's mentioned they're going to make mistakes, but it comes amid a lot of reporting. And this is AP, NBC, NPR, New York Times, Fox News, reporting that some of DOJ's biggest claims in recent weeks, and DOJ has a monitor. If you go to DOJ's website, you can see that they claim right now, as of Wednesday night, that they've cut $65 billion with a B. They call it a wall of receipts. Many are misleading. In fact, the 5 biggest savings on the original list, well, they've been deleted from that list over the last couple of days after being pointed out by the media. At one point, DOJ claimed that there were $8 billion in savings from eliminating a contract for immigrations and customs enforcement. That $8 billion was actually $8 million. There was also a triple count of a USAID contract that they added up $655 million 3 times. The savings there, $18 million. And then there was a discrepancy on the Social Security Administration claim. They said they saved $232 million. The actual savings on that by DOJ, $560,000. So a number of claims here by DOJ they've had to retract. Still, they claim $65 billion in their wall of receipts. Nearly half those receipts actually save the government no money. It's a lot of optics. It's a long list because ultimately a lot of that money has already been spent. So they've canceled the contract after the money has gone out, after the money has already been approved. So DOJ has been focused on employee salaries, contracts here, but a lot of controversy that a lot of the claims they're making are not reliable, in some cases completely false. Jill, you can see here DOJ it has saved several $1 billion with a B, probably, but clearly not $65 billion. They say this is all part of the process. Critics will say this is what you get when you put a bunch of people who've never been in government and don't really know how to read our contracts in charge of this process.
We also got some other headlines from the cabinet meeting. Trump took questions for nearly an hour, during which he confirmed that the U.S. and Ukraine have reached a minerals deal. Trump said that Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky will be in Washington tomorrow. As part of his trip, he'll be signing a deal promising the United States access to much of Ukraine's rare earth minerals as a way to pay for U.S. support in the war against Russia. The meeting has still not been confirmed by Kyiv. Trump said it is a great deal for Ukraine because the U.S. will be on the ground in Ukraine, which means that, quote, there is sort of automatic security because nobody's going to be messing around with our people when we're there. However, Trump said that the minerals deal will not include literal security guarantees for Ukraine after a potential peace deal with Russia, essentially punting responsibility to the European countries. Also, he said that those tariffs on Mexico and Canada, the 25% tariffs, will now go into effect on April 2nd.
Yeah, a lot of news. I mean, Trump's been taking a lot of questions. Jill, I've seen a count. He's taken more than 1,000 questions in his first 4 weeks. In the same period of time, Biden took about 100 questions. In many of those cabinet meetings, by the way, they let the media in during the Biden era. The few cabinet meetings he did have, you would come in for like 2 to 3 minutes. The president would say something off of a note card, and then you'd walk out. Trump literally takes questions for an hour. And so that's why we have these, various headlines on all these matters, because reporters had the opportunity to ask him dozens of questions during this meeting. On the Mexico and Canada front, the markets certainly reacted to that, saying, wait, the tariffs are real here after being postponed. A lot of confusion because the next deadline comes up in early March. Trump said April 2nd. So I think Canada, Mexico, all seeking clarification right now on what those, if those tariffs are actually going to go into effect in April, how serious the president is, and what, could lead to a further delay there. Another bit of news yesterday, and this is super important. We told you yesterday about the House Republicans passing a massive budget bill that now lays the groundwork for the negotiations about extending the Trump tax cuts, making them permanent. If you recall, back in 2017, Trump passed a whole bunch of tax cuts. We currently get to enjoy them. They are set to expire this year. But if they are made permanent, that means that about $4 trillion estimated comes out of the U.S. budget because that's less tax money coming in. So Republicans have said, listen, if we're going to extend the tax cuts, we're not going to go into that much further debt over it. So we need to find commensurate cuts. We need to find $2 trillion in cuts in order to spend $4 trillion. So we will go into more debt, but just not as much as you might. So House Republicans, the assumption for a number of them is that they're going to look into Medicaid for potential cuts. Because when you look at the U.S. budget, there ain't many places to look to cut. The vast majority of money spent on Social Security, Medicaid, Medicare. You have the military, which takes up about $900 billion. And then you have interest on our debt, which is about $1 trillion a year now. You can't touch that. You got to pay your interest. And so the entire rest of the government is $1 trillion. So 80% of the government, essentially untouchable. Republicans were going to touch Medicaid and look for cuts there. Well, Trump in the cabinet meeting yesterday said, nope, you're not touching Medicaid. So this is going to lead to a very interesting debate on Capitol Hill, especially among sort of the hard right Republicans who are fiscal conservatives. Where are they going to find the savings? And what does this mean for Trump's, what he calls one big, beautiful bill that's going to have the tax cuts and have a whole variety of things? What will end up there? This is something Senate Republicans have said, but now that Trump says Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, do not touch them. Obviously look for fraud, but do not touch them. Do not cut benefits, because it turns out that both Democrats and Republicans get Medicaid. Last but not least here, Jill, the gold card that Trump announced yesterday. You might have heard of a green card that allows people to initially get status here in America and become citizens. Well, he's announced a gold card that you can pay $5 million for. It would give you permanent U.S. residency and a route to citizenship. His goal, to sell 1 million of them at $5 million apiece. He wants to make $5 trillion. He's hoping that that is one way the U.S. Treasury can raise money to pay off the debt here. The challenge, there are only a few people in the world who can spend $5 million on U.S. citizenship. If you actually look around, you need to be worth more than $5 million to pay $5 million. So you got to be looking at what they call ultra high net worth individuals, UNHW individuals. Those are people who have more than $30 million in assets, which is basically what you would need if you're going to drop $5 million on U.S. citizenship. There's only a few 100,000 of those people in the world. And it's interesting, Jill, when we posted this on Instagram 2 nights ago, I heard from somebody, a wealth advisor, who works with ultra high net worth individuals. And he's like, let me tell you something about those people. They love America to visit. They love America to invest in, to buy property in, but they do not want to become citizens, the vast majority of them, because they don't want to pay American taxes for the rest of time. And the U.S. is unique in that way that once you become a citizen, you owe taxes every year. And something really, really rich people have in common with basically everyone is they don't like paying taxes, and so they'll find ways to avoid it. So it'll be interesting here to see how many people invest in this gold card for U.S. citizenship. Again, Trump trying to raise money here. He thinks companies might do it to bring skilled workers, pay $5 million, knowing that that person might bring much more value to the company, to the U.S., though there are other cheaper visa options like the H-1B visa, et cetera. Now, we have a version of the system right now. It's called the EB-5 program, which today allows you, and there's about 10,000 every year let in on this EB-5 program, and it currently offers green cards to people who invest at least $900,000 to about $2 million into the U.S. and create 10 jobs. Now, there's a lot of sketchiness around that program. Questions as to whether the investment actually happens, whether they actually hire those people. There's been a bunch of cases of fraud here. So there has been talk about reforming the EB-5 program. But ultimately here, there are questions as to whether the gold card is the solution. Trump is bullish on this, and it remains to be seen, again, how many people are ready to drop $5 million. There were concerns about, well, who actually has that amount of money? Does that let in potential criminals, to which the Trump administration is promising they're going to vet people?
Moshe, I am curious to see who gets this gold card, if anybody gets it.
Well, people are going to get it.
Do you want if you have that much money, do you want American citizenship? To your point about the taxes, it is going to be fascinating if the information ever is made public to see who is buying that gold card to get an American visa.
Yeah, is American citizenship worth what it used to be versus your, let's say, EU citizenship? And so clearly a program, EB-5, in need of reform. The question is, will this be successful reform?
Also discussed at the cabinet meeting the first death from the measles outbreak. A child who was not vaccinated has died from measles in West Texas. It is the first death from measles in the United States since 2015. Texas health officials say it was a school-aged child, again, who was not vaccinated and had been hospitalized last week. The measles outbreak in rural Texas has grown to 124 cases across 9 counties. State health officials say it is the largest outbreak in Texas in nearly 30 years. There are also 9 cases in eastern New Mexico. So at the cabinet meeting on Wednesday, President Trump was asked about the outbreak, to which he gave the floor to his HHS Secretary, Robert F. Kennedy Jr., who said his department is watching the outbreak and notably described what's happening as, quote, not unusual.
So as we all know by now, Robert F. Kennedy Jr. is a longtime vaccine skeptic who has clashed with the medical establishment over his stance on vaccines. He tried to convince senators during the confirmation hearings that, he wouldn't intrude too much. He was just looking at safety here. But he has always been a critic of the measles vaccine. And, people took note of the fact that he did sort of downplay the measles outbreak right now that's happening in West Texas. He said there have been 4 measles outbreaks in the country this year so far. Last year, there were 16, so it's not unusual. We have measles outbreaks every year. Jill, if you look at the past 15 years or so, we are basically on average, slightly above average right now so far in the year compared to previous years in terms of the number of cases we've had this year. He's right that we did have more at this time last year. So it's something we'll continue to monitor. But it is notable that there's a death. This is the first death in the U.S. since 2015 and the first measles death of a child in the U.S. since 2003. So 22 years you got to go back before a child died in the U.S. from measles. Now, we told you more about the outbreak yesterday. Kennedy hasn't provided specifics on how they're assisting on the ground here or what they're doing about it, just that they're monitoring it. So we'll continue to watch that. But in other related news related to vaccines and stuff under Kennedy's purview, we learned last night that the annual FDA meeting of experts to determine the fall flu vaccines has been canceled, with no explanation, at least not as of late Wednesday night. It was set for March 13th. They have this meeting every March, and that's where they determine, what variants do we think of the flu are going to be happening this year. And then they begin the 6-month production process to produce the flu vaccine to have it ready for August, September, ahead of the flu season. The concern here, this will delay production of the flu vaccine. Again, no explanation from Kennedy's office, but he does oversee the FDA, the CDC, all the various major medical agencies within the government. So we will wait for explanation there. We should note this year, and this is remarkable, 20,000 Americans have died from the flu this season, just under 100 children. About 50% of Americans take the flu vaccine. 400,000 Americans have been hospitalized this year due to the flu. So there's a lot of concern here. I mean, the flu is deadly. 20,000 Americans die from it every year, and that's with the vaccine. And it's about 50% effectiveness some years. They actually got the variant right this year. They predicted it right. Some years they get it off. And so we'll see what the reaction is on Capitol Hill to this. Some Republicans, again, who Kennedy had convinced that, he is a vaccine skeptic, but ultimately isn't going to take away vaccines without, major research into them. Why this meeting was canceled, what it means is the story we'll be watching in the coming days and weeks.
Time for the speed read, starting with the Middle East. From CNN, on Wednesday, Hamas handed over another 4 dead Israeli hostages. Israel's carrying out its forensic identification of the bodies near the border to determine whether Hamas has returned the hostages that it is required to, as opposed to last week when they turned over the wrong body. In exchange, Israel has promised to return more than 600 Palestinian prisoners. So this is now the last exchange agreed to as part of Phase 1 of this fragile truce in Gaza. Phase 1 was set to last 6 weeks, and it ends next week. The fate of Phase 2 of the ceasefire, which aims to end the war and free the remaining 60 hostages, is still unclear. So now that the first phase is almost over, Israel has said Hamas has three choices. They can continue to release hostages and extend the ceasefire, which essentially would just be a continuation of phase one. Another option, it can agree to Israel's terms that it disarm, that its leaders go into exile, and that it give up any civil control over Gaza. And then Israel would move to the second phase of the deal, which would see all of the hostages released and the war would come to an end. Or the third option, Hamas can choose to end the ceasefire, which would mean a return to all-out war.
So that middle option, Hamas, disarming, giving up power of Gaza, very unlikely at this juncture. It's not something Hamas is inclined to do, which leaves you with the two other options: either extend phase one for a bit, or just go back to war here. The U.S. envoy Steve Witkoff, we've told you about him. He's a close Trump friend, real estate developer who's become the key negotiator here as the Middle East envoy. In the Middle East, incidentally, Trump likes his work there so much, he's also made him the key negotiator for Ukraine and Russia. So he's been jumping back and forth there. And due to this likely Zelensky meeting we mentioned on Friday, he's going to head back to the Middle East for that part of his portfolio this weekend. And he's hoping to do an extension of phase one that Jill just mentioned, basically continue these exchanges over time, since some of those issues in phase two, like who runs Gaza, Israel permanently ending the war and pulling all of its troops out, not likely right now. Those are big decisions that'll be super controversial for both sides. Notably, right now, the U.S. and Israel are pretty in sync. Trump at the cabinet meeting yesterday was asked about this, and he said, listen, Israel can do what it wants. Hamas is sort of pissing me off with how they're returning the hostages. So I'll leave it to Bibi and the Israelis to determine what they want to do next. Israel did the U.S. a favor by voting with them in the UN this week on a resolution not condemning Russia and the war in Ukraine. Not necessarily Israeli foreign policy there, but the U.S. was voting with Russia to end the war, but not blame Russia. Israel was one of the few countries that voted with the U.S. and Russia there, again, as a favor. So a lot of closeness right now between the U.S. Government and the Israeli government. And so we'll watch that in the coming days. We should mention it was a very emotional day yesterday in Israel. It was actually the funeral for the Bibas family, the two sons, Ariel and Kfir, who were 4 years old and 9 months old, respectively, when they were kidnapped, as well as their mother, Shiri. Thousands of people lined the streets there to pay their respects for a funeral procession. They've really become a few of the faces of the hostages over the course of the past 16 months here. There was a powerful eulogy given by Yarden Bibas, the father who was kidnapped and then returned earlier this month, and then found out that his wife and two kids were killed. We've put up his full eulogy over on the Instagram page, and just, heartbreaking to watch that. I can't even imagine the pain that he feels. Jill, that's what we know about the region and in the real world. As far as the AI world, Trump on social media yesterday, on a related front, shared a video of the transformation of Gaza into a kind of Dubai-like resort. This has AI Elon Musk in it, AI Trump in it, AI Netanyahu in it. At the end, you see Trump and Netanyahu like lying, sipping drinks, shirtless in this new Gaza. There's also like the Trump Gaza building, the Trump casino, is effectively what you would imagine in like a fantasy Trump would want to see in Gaza, but hugely controversial. There was at one point in the AI video a golden statue of Trump in front of a beachfront skyscraper coming out of the rubble. Super controversial. A lot of people just like were asking us yesterday, like, is this real? I'm like, well, the video isn't real, but it was tweeted out by all of Trump's official accounts.
If you looked closely, Moshe, you may have seen a very tan-looking Elon Musk. I almost feel like his shirt was like unbuttoned and open. It may not have been. There's a lot of shirtless, prominent men in that AI video. But I think he was maybe eating hummus. He was dipping pita into hummus and looked so happy in the AI video. Right. In the AI Trump Gaza like video in front of the golden Trump statue. The question that I had is, was this created by Trump and his team, or did somebody else create this, maybe almost like a joke, and Trump saw it and just reposted it? Listen, I think both could be reality. I imagine there are some reporters asking the White House for details on that. The White House said, well, this is their statement on it. President Trump has said Gaza in its current state is uninhabitable for any human being.
and, kind of reiterated his stance, but didn't go into detail on the production of said video. But again, super controversial, even among people who, might support Trump's position or the Israeli position here, being like, well, that, I can see where a lot of people find what he put out there very offensive. But there you have it. There's Elon and Trump are both known to share a lot of memes online.
From CNN, Monica Lewinsky back in the news, revisiting the events involving Bill Clinton that first put her in the media spotlight over 25 years ago. She said the former president should have resigned from office at the time. So Lewinsky sat down with Call Her Daddy podcast host Alex Cooper, and she responded to a question on how she thought the matter should have been handled by the media and the White House once the news broke that the former president had an affair with her when she was a White House intern. So Lewinsky, you could see, thinks for a little bit and says, wow, I've never actually been asked that question. And here's her answer.
I think that the right way to handle a situation like that would have been to probably say it was, nobody's business, and to resign, or to find a way of staying in office that was not lying and not throwing a young person who was just starting out in the world under the bus.
Lewinsky told Cooper she believes other young women suffered because of the treatment that she herself endured at the time of the political scandal.
So if you had our favorite phrase here, bingo card for 2025, Jill, would you have had a revisiting of the Monica Lewinsky scandal?
You know what? This one doesn't surprise me that much because I follow Monica Lewinsky on Twitter. Yeah. And I've kind of kept up with her. And I think that she has reinvented herself and has stayed very relevant, particularly because of social media. And she's been this huge advocate against bullying on social media. So I'm not totally shocked.
So it's interesting talking to Alice Cooper, who was basically a baby when this whole scandal was going down, wasn't even in kindergarten yet. Cooper was born in 94. And so, ultimately that's when, Monica was applying to be an intern at the White House there. So interesting having this conversation across generations here. And here's a bit more from the conversation she had with Cooper, talking about the impact it had on women of that generation.
I think there was so much collateral damage for women of my generation to watch a young woman to be pilloried on the world stage, to be torn apart, for my sexuality, for my mistakes, for my everything.
Jill, if you recall that time period, she was the subject of jokes on late night Halloween costumes, was endlessly mocked. And she was a 21-year-old at the time. And in the context of today, kind of post Me Too, you look back at it and, you would see that this was an older man taking a much more powerful older man, the most powerful older man in the country, taking advantage of a 21-year-old intern. But back then, she was sort of victimized, seen as the antagonist. And so, ultimately, she's tried to your point, reframe what took place there in the 90s with, more context and a more modern sensibility here.
For anybody who's looking for a refresher on the Monica Lewinsky scandal, I highly recommend The American Crime Story. It came out a while ago, but it was over on FX. So good. Yeah. It really revisits everything, and it's like a behind the scenes of what Monica was going through during this time. Highly recommend.
Yeah, I think you can catch it over on Hulu, is my understanding. It's part of FX. It's an FX series, but was over there. But yeah, I think they did a very good job. And also, to us, Jill, we were in as that was going on, high school into college there. And I don't think that we even totally, at that age, totally understood exactly what was happening. And I think, looking back at it now, have some experience to look at that scandal differently. There was actually an interview that Monica Lewinsky did with Jake Tapper over on CNN a couple of years ago. We should note, by the way, funny random fact, Jake Tapper and Monica Lewinsky went on a date at one point in Washington, a first date.
Before or after?
Before. When nobody knew who Monica Lewinsky was.
Or Jake Tapper, probably.
No one knew who Jake Tapper was, and no one knew who Monica Lewinsky was at the time. But Jake has written about it. Monica has discussed it. Anyway, the whole point of that is not the fact that they went on a date in the 90s, but she did this interview with him a couple years ago.
I want to know everything. Where did they go? What did they have? Why didn't they go out a second time?
Well, Monica had her eyes set on someone else.
Yes, we could guess.
Jake was not powerful enough for her at that moment. Anyway, she talks about how, the way that she framed it was like, this was wholly inappropriate. The most powerful man, my boss, was 49 years old. I was 22 years old, literally just out of college. And I think that the power differentials, there was something that I can't fathom the consequences at 22. And now she understands it much better because now, guess what? Monica Lewinsky is just over the age that Bill Clinton was when the affair happened. So she sees it through the eyes of, age here.
From Axios, we have gone from soy to oat to almond to pistachio, and now we are back to just regular old milk.
Jill, you forgot cashew. We do cashew in this house sometimes.
Well, according to the New York Times, by the end of the 20th century, it seemed like cow's milk was over. But in 2024, America's consumption of whole milk jumped 3.2%, while consumption of plant-based milk dropped 5.9%. That was only the second increase in whole milk consumption since the 70s, and it was the third straight year that plant-based milk consumption fell. Analysts say for dairy milk to be growing at all is surprising, much less by the amount that it grew, and it reverses trends that have been in place for decades. So, Moshe, what is going on? What's behind this?
So, one, price, right? Nut and plant milks are not cheap. Coffee chains have been charging extra for years, though they've been facing a lot of pressure to drop those charges. There's also the health part of this. Those nut milks come with sweeteners, emulsifiers, stabilizers, effectively making them ultra processed. So Americans now reprioritizing protein, healthy fats. Well, where do you look for that? Cow's milk. So there is that. There's also interest in raw milk. That's spiking. Sales skyrocketed last year. Though beware of raw milk because ultimately there you could get certain bacteria because it's not pasteurized. There's also concern about that with bird flu. Nonetheless, raw milk interest is spiking. People talking about their raw milk, their milk people, right? Like Gwyneth Paltrow and others. But ultimately, you see these trend lines. Dairy milk made this huge push in the 90s, right? The whole Got Milk campaign, stressing that you should be drinking a whole glass of milk in the morning, glass of milk with meals. Well, that was just sort of excessive. And then there was the correction for all of that with all these plant-based milks. And now we're just coming back around again. So, it's like everything else, like fashion and other thlike when something is out of style, it comes back, except for disco. Disco's never really come back.
Disco has never recovered.
Disco, right? Like fashion from disco, that's come back. Like there is like elements of it, but like just the music. Anyway, I digress. We often talk about like how disco rose and fall very quickly, and just the people are like, no, you're not coming back.
As we have famously reported here on this day in history, disco had a Grammy category for 1 year. That was it. And then they're like, we're done.
The Grammys are like, oh, there's this disco thing. We must have best disco song and best disco album. It was dead by the following year.
Now to a sad story from the world of entertainment. From Variety, actress Michelle Trachtenberg has died at the age of 39. Trachtenberg started as a child performer with high-profile roles like the title character in Harriet the Spy before finding success on Buffy the Vampire Slayer and Gossip Girl. She was found unconscious and unresponsive in her Manhattan apartment. She reportedly recently underwent a liver transplant. The cause of death has not been confirmed, but the NYPD said criminality is not suspected. In a statement, the police department said officers responded to a 911 call just after 8 a.m. on Wednesday, and Trachtenberg was pronounced dead by emergency medical workers who also responded to the scene.
Just a very sad story here. She actually started acting at the age of 3, appearing in commercials. You might remember her from the Nickelodeon series, The Adventures of Pete and Pete, back in the mid-90s. Her big first role, her lead role there is Harriet the Spy back in 1996. That's when she was 10 years old, starring in that film. She then moved on to Buffy the Vampire Slayer. She was Georgina Sparks in Gossip Girl. So her death yesterday really took a lot of people by surprise. Very sad. And, we'll wait to learn more here about the cause of death. But she'd posted some photos and videos in recent months that started to concern many of her fans.
And finally, from Axios, even the tooth fairy is strapped for cash these days. According to an annual poll by Delta Dental, the tooth fairy's rewards for a lost tooth have dropped for the second year in a row. So the average payout for a single tooth was $5.01 this year, down 14% from last year, and more than $1 less than the record high of $6.23 in 2023. Amid peak inflation.
Yeah. So third graders and fourth graders, well done being born when you did. You got peak money from the tooth fairy. Sorry to kindergartners and first graders and those younger. You're going to get less cash these days. It's interesting, Jill, based on this survey, they found trend lines different and the price of a tooth different across the country. So down in the South, that's where you get the most for your tooth from the tooth fairy, $5.71 on average. In the Northeast, you're down to $4.59. You're getting $1 less, more than $1 less if you live in places like where we are. Jill, have you been talking to the tooth fairy near you? Because, I know Alex is nearing the age, right? If she's not at the age where she's starting to lose teeth.
Oh, she's jonesing to lose a tooth. She'll touch a tooth that is not supposed to be loose. Usually it's the two front or the bottom two. And she'll be like, it's coming. I'm like, Alex, if that tooth is loose, we have a problem. I don't know why that random tooth in the back of your mouth is loose. But I would suspect we'd probably give about $5.
Okay, so slightly above the Northeast average. But I should note, in the South, half of the kids are getting from the tooth fairy more than $5.71, right? If that's the average, followed by the West. Out in the West, you're getting $5.69 on average for a tooth. Then comes the Northeast. The Midwest, $3.46 a tooth.
All right, Midwest.
you really got it.
What's going on?
Listen, the tooth fairy, she's running out of money after she shows up in the South, and she's giving out whatever's left when she shows up in Indiana.
I don't ever remember getting any money from the tooth fairy. Do you? Maybe $1. I don't. Or a quarter.
I think the tooth fairy. I feel like I got some for the first couple teeth, but at some point, I think it gets old, right? I don't know. By the 11th tooth, is the tooth fairy
you're
still
also
paying
older.
you?
I think you realize it's not a fairy; it's your parents.
Oh wait, what do you mean? There's not a fairy, Jill?
Actually, kids, if you're listening. It is a fairy. I don't want to ruin anyone's.
No, there is a tooth fairy, and they're very busy. And they apparently pay more in the South than they do in the Midwest. There you go. All right, now time for On This Day in History. On this day in 1827, a group of masked and costumed students start dancing through the streets of New Orleans. You know what I'm getting to here. This marked the beginning of Mardi Gras celebrations. They're back on this day in 1827. Carnival had spread from Rome across Europe and later to the Americas. The early French settlers brought the tradition of Mardi Gras to the U.S. Gulf Coast in the 1600s. However, the Spanish actually banned celebrations for a while there. The Louisiana Territory, Jefferson buys it from the French. And that's when New Orleans residents there in the early 1800s convinced the city council to lift the ban on wearing masks that the Spanish had for a while and begin to bring the tradition of Mardi Gras to New Orleans, where it still is. Jill, I should note, we're just about a week out from Mardi Gras. Tuesday, March 4th, officially Mardi Gras. But in New Orleans, it's sort of every day is Mardi Gras. All right, on this day in 1951, the 22nd Amendment of the Constitution, limiting a president to 2 terms in office, was ratified. This was in the aftermath of FDR having 4 terms. Notably, there are some people around Trump and some members of Republican members of Congress who would like to amend the amendment to allow him to get a 3rd term. As I've told you guys on the Instagram account, that is highly, 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 highly unlikely. Let's just call it impossible at this juncture, given what it takes to pass a constitutional amendment. Nonetheless, a bit of history that is potentially being revisited here in the next couple of years.
Moshe, that is something that I discussed over on the premium podcast feed with Ben Sheehan. He wrote a book called What Does the Constitution Actually Say? That interview has been up over on our premium feed for the past few days, but it is now available for everybody on our interview podcast feed. So definitely check it out. I have gotten tons of really kind messages about the interview. So it sounds like it is resonating with people.
Yeah. So search Mo News Interview if you don't already subscribe to that podcast, the Mo News Interview podcast on whatever platform you listen to this podcast on. A bit of TV news history for you on this day. Walter Cronkite, considered the most trusted man in America at the time on this day in 1968, broke from his usual objectivity to predict that the Vietnam War could end only in a stalemate, critical of the war on this day on a broadcast that the president was watching that night and had a huge impact. Says Walter Cronkite there on this day in 1968. His commentary was credited with changing U.S. public opinion on the conflict. 33 days later, President Johnson announced he was not running for re-election as the war became increasingly unpopular. And we end here with our clue, Jill. On this day in 1996, Alanis Morissette released her song Ironic, February 27th, 1996. We should note, and this has been a huge criticism of Ironic, is that most of the things in the song that she lists in the song Ironic, Jill, are not actually ironic by definition. Like an old man turned 98, he won the lottery and then died the next day. That's just sad. Ironic.
Moshe, welcome to the biggest pet peeve I had in the 90s.
It's like
none
Black
of it's
Fly
ironic. That is
Chardonnay.
the irony.
It's a death row pardon 2 minutes late. Like that's
it's
also
all
really
bad
sad.
luck. None of it's ironic. It is all just bad luck.
Rain on your wedding days. It's just, like if you like it, that's great. If you didn't want rain and it was an outdoor wedding, like that sucks for you. But
some have said it's actually good luck. Rain on your wedding day.
That could be something else. But that again is not ironic.
10,000 spoons when all you need is a knife. Annoying, not ironic.
That's super annoying. Can you imagine? So anyway,
meeting the man of your dreams and then meeting his beautiful wife.
Yeah.
Anyway, I could go on,
yes.
and clearly I will. But
and by the way, Alanis has been asked about this, and she said that she didn't actually focus on making sure everything was technically ironic when she wrote the song. So she just wants everyone to know she's aware of the criticism, and she stands by her song.
Some have opined that the song itself is ironic because it's about irony and it's not actually ironic. And that maybe that was the point. I don't think so. I think she just was trying to rhyme.
I think it was a great song. And we've been talking about this. We talked about some other 90s music recently, right? The Backstreet Boys, where their lyrics made zero sense because they were written by guys that didn't really know English. So, I Want It That Way is another 90s song where we don't know what that is. And, we don't know basically the crux of the dilemma that they're having there. Ironic, at least, you could make an argument for a couple of those things. You could stretch them out depending on your definition of irony. Jill, Alanis might note that it's ironic right now that we're coming to the end of the podcast. I mean, it's not actually ironic, but by ironic song standards, it's ironic. We could say it.
Especially when you still have 15 minutes left in your commute and we didn't get you there. So yes, by Alanis's definition, this would be ironic. But for everybody else, we'll just end this here, put you out of your misery. Thank you for listening to the Mo News podcast. If you like what you hear, please share this with your friends. It will help us grow. Follow us and subscribe so you don't miss an episode, and review us in the App Store.
Get excited, everybody. Tomorrow's Friday.